Welcome to One Version of the Truth. This is a show about how leaders make decisions in complex environments where incentives are messy, priorities compete, and there's rarely a single objective answer. In each episode, I sit down with operators, executives, and industry leaders to unpack how value is actually created and how data and AI can help distort or get misunderstood along the way. I'm your host, Taylor Culver. I work with senior leaders to connect data to real business outcomes. I started this podcast to move beyond theory and frameworks and get to the judgment calls that actually move the organization forward. Today, I'm joined by Tony Shaw, CEO of Dataversity, one of the longest running and most influential communities in the data space. Tony has spent decades building communities, educating practitioners, and watching the data industry evolve through multiple waves: enterprise data management, governance, big data, cloud, and now AI. In this conversation, we explore a reality many data leaders eventually discover. The hardest part of data leadership usually isn't the technology, it's people. We talk about why social capital matters more than most data professionals may realize, how great data leaders build influence across organizations, why business context matters more than technical purity, and what the rise of AI means for the future of governance, stewardship, and leadership. And maybe most importantly, why the leaders who succeed are often the ones who learn how to build trust and community, not just better systems. This is Season 1, Episode 6 with Tony Shaw. Let's get into it. I'm really lucky to have Tony Shaw on One Version of the Truth. Tony has been running Dataversity for over a decade. He's been a major part of the data community, supporting many of the initiatives of DAMA, and has been an integral voice in the development of data leaders for quite some time now. Tony, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, first of all, thanks very much for having me on your podcast, Taylor. I've always enjoyed our conversations and our relationship. So I started Dataversity in 2011. It was the evolution of another company I had called Wilshire Conferences, which was very much focused on running one major event per year. It was the Enterprise Data World Conference. We did some other things after that in the areas of semantic technology as well, and eventually in data governance. But Dataversity was the sort of growth from that singular focus on conferences to a broader community-oriented organization with a digital presence and products in the data training area. So at this point, yeah, we're a bit more diverse. In fact, since COVID, we've focused much more on digital delivery, but we still do our conferences. We had a major conference a couple of weeks ago, the DGIQ and EDW conference, with about 600 people. So that side of our business still exists and is very much part of our identity as a company.
So you've been leading a fairly large community now through some major cycles. You've started just after the financial crisis, saw us through big data, are now seeing us through the advent of AI. What's changed since you first started, and what's kind of stayed the same?
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned the financial crisis, because I think that was really the kickstart. And this, I don't mean this to sound sarcastic, but it might come across a bit that way. You know, that was the kickstart that data governance really needed when Sarbanes-Oxley and, some of the really egregious examples of bad reporting, egregious corporate behavior became apparent when that's what started to drive data governance, specifically in the financial services sector, but much more broadly than that as well. And so we sometimes joke that we really need another crisis to give our business another new reason to exist, or to boost the interest in it. But yeah, I mean, there have been subsequent issues that have driven data management. I think actually AI, I certainly wouldn't put it in the crisis category, but it has created a real surge in interest now around fundamental good data practices. Now we're into the year of context, as Gartner would describe it. Yet another thing that needs good data to be properly executed or to be fully executed, fully effective. So yeah, sometimes the drivers behind data management education are a crisis or a problem. Other times they're an opportunity. Right now we're in that that world of opportunity, I think.
I like that. It's one of these things where AI is top of mind for every executive that I talk to. And shortly thereafter, it's, well, we're not seeing the value from it quite yet. And I was at a conference, the Innovation and Imagination and Action conference at MIT a couple weeks ago, and almost every speaker was speaking to the hype around AI. And in its own right, that might become the next crisis, which is the disconnect of value and AI, not diminishing the value of the technology, but to your point, the importance of the contextual or the semantic layer to get value from that technology becomes critical for it to produce value.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm especially tracking the semantic layer conversation. As I mentioned, we did a series of conferences around semantic technology, goodness, almost 20 years ago now. Or they were 20 years ago. And there are a lot of the same types of conversations then about how to get, information to be understood by machines and to gain a level of efficiency and reasoning and inference and efficiency from all of that. But we didn't have everything else that needed to exist in order for that to happen at the time. So it is really interesting to me to see that now that we have the amount of data, the level of processing, the capacity to do this type of have this kind of contextual understanding that didn't exist before, that a lot of those people and organizations who we worked with even 20 years ago are now at the forefront of what's happening in the world. Because back at the time, it was like, oh my God, this is too hard to understand. This is too complicated. We don't want to learn this. There's no payoff there. But it just kind of took some time for the rest of the world to catch up, I guess.
So the data people have always been ahead of the curve. Tell me this.
Goodness, I'm not sure I would agree with that statement, but we can run with it.
No, kind of in that same vein,
Well, to answer that,
yeah,
to give you context, I mean, yeah, look, I think the ideals of great data management have always been somewhat idealistic, and have, I think, rightly been criticized on many occasions for being sort of too idealistic and not practical enough, or too rigid and not practical enough. And so I think a lot of those criticisms are true. And yes, in some cases they were ahead of the trend, or pardon me, ahead of reality, and reality finally caught up. But by the same token, I think even once the reality does catch up to the idea, the idea has to keep evolving, because if you sort of sit on your laurels and say, okay, well that thing that we have always talked about is here now, and isn't it great? But the world is going to continue to move really fast, and so there are a lot of things, let's just say around data governance or data stewardship, for example, where we get inquiries from customers saying, we want to do training on data stewardship, but we want it to be about where data stewardship will be in a year or in 2 years. We don't want it to be based on these kind of legacy concepts of what it was to do good data quality or data governance. So yeah, and yet, I see people sort of stuck on this idea that they've always had, and you've really got to keep everything moving forward. So yeah, I guess that's where my observation about not always being ahead of the curve would come from. Is I think there's a lot of folks, and it's not typical. It's not specific to data management people. I mean, I think unfortunately it's kind of a human trait, especially when you get to a certain point in your career or in your life where the things that have always served you well maybe aren't the things that will serve you well in future, and it's kind of hard to let go of them.
yeah. It's almost like, would it be better said that the principles are timeless, but the practices need to evolve to serve modern technical needs?
I think most of the principles have been pretty timeless. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So tell me this, and you're a CEO of a data business. I wouldn't call you a data leader, but your cohort is thousands of data leaders over the years. You know them quite well. At which point did you realize that the conference business that you had started wasn't just a conference business, but it was a content business. In addition to that, you're building one of the world's largest communities of data professionals.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think from the start it was always it was a content business. I mean, you don't start a conference just because you think you want to run conferences. You run it because you think you have value to provide in terms of educating people or bringing them together or connecting, buyers and sellers or whatever that objective might be. I mean, there's a business objective behind the conference itself. But yeah, I think for the first half of our life, I considered us mostly a content business. This is a place to come for world-class education, to learn from your peers, to the learning part was critical. And it still is, but I think at this point we are as much a community as we are a content business. And the reason that's critical is, most of the content that you could hear at one of our events is probably available in some other format, some other way for a lot less money. An article, a podcast, and, some webinar that somebody's. What really makes the difference is the interpersonal connection and learning directly from your peers. Personally, I've always found that for the type of learner that I am, the most valuable way for me to discover new things. And, everybody talks about the value of the lunchtime conversation or the corridor conversation. I mean, that really is where a substantial portion of the value of being at a conference is. And we, in particular, I think, cultivate the idea of openness, sharing. If you have a question, ask the person next to you or go up to the speaker afterwards, and don't be intimidated by the fact that they've written 5 books and your first day on the job. I mean, so that's the culture of the event that we create. And that's the first thing I talk to people about on the first morning of the event. It's like, turn to your left and your right and say hi to somebody you've never talked to before. Because I want the event to have that kind of energy. I think I've forgotten your question now, but content to community. Yeah. I mean, we are still a content business. I mean, I've, at the conference we did a couple of weeks ago, there's a lot of stories that had not been told before outside the walls of whatever organization there was. But like 80% of the talks that are there are case studies or they're practitioners talking about what they've done, what they've learned. In some cases, what they're doing is cutting edge. In other cases, they're just getting off the ground and, talking about some failures. But there are people at all those levels who are attending the conference. So, those stories are valuable. And yeah, that content is still important, but it's the culture in which the stories are presented and shared and followed up on. And that's just as important at this point to the success of our particular conference business.
What I've always loved about your events is how accessible people are. And I had dinner with you and some pretty senior people. There were chief data officers around very different organizations. And the conversation was candid, was authentic, and no jargon was being used. They're talking about some hard truths. And I think that's really special. And I work with a lot of data leaders individually, and they just don't have that community because there's usually one of them within an organization. And it's so
Yeah.
amazing that you can find someone in a completely different organization at any seniority experiencing the same challenges and limitations of what the responsibilities come with that role. And it's really a special thing. And it's something I've very much admired about what you've built.
Well, I appreciate that. So one of the guidelines I give to the people who are conducting panels at our events is treat it as a dinner conversation or, a pub conversation. If it's, a question being asked and the 4 panelists all get a chance to answer it, my goodness, that ends up being awful. It has to be where the panelists can kind of jump on something that the last person said and take it just like it happens in a dinner conversation. Panelists are asking each other questions. The moderator's role is just to kind of guide us back on track if we get off topic, and then bring out the dessert at the end of the meal. so that we finish off nicely. But yeah, the learning you get from conversation is so much more productive and stays with you so much longer than the learning you get from recitals or just being spoken at.
It's funny you say that because these are some principles that I think data leaders could employ in their day to day. Because it's not uncommon for a data leader or a CDO to be like, hey, come use blah, blah, blah technology because it's the best, or we're going to do data governance because we have to. The analogy I always use with the people I work with is, hey, take them out for coffee. Go get to know what kids they have, what sports they like, get to know them as a
Yeah.
person, and then
Yeah.
talk about that. It may seem intuitive for someone like yourself, but I don't think it's as intuitive for sometimes for us within organizations to put aside our own agendas to kind of build community outside our own
Yeah,
comfort zone.
I agree with you. It's not necessarily intuitive. So the label that I would put on that is social capital, I think. And actually, when I was reading through some of the questions, and I told you before, and I didn't do any preparation for this conversation, but I at least read the questions in advance. And there's a gentleman who's is CDO who I've just the utmost respect for, a guy called Curtis Mishler over at Delta Dental of Michigan. And I sent him a note. I saw him a couple of weeks ago, and I sent him a note afterwards. I just said, he's a very socially articulate person. He's not overly serious. And his boss Toby, they're like two peas in a pod. And I said, to what extent do you think your longevity? Because these guys have been in the same roles for I don't know how many years, but long enough that their portion of the business, a data portion of the business, was actually spun out as a new business.
Wow.
Yeah. And it wasn't that they took it out. It was that the corporation they worked for said, okay, we need to make your business a service to all the other insurance companies. So, we can talk about that if you like, the importance of being so business focused that you become a new business. But you can just tell that these folks they have a lot of social capital with their stakeholders. And I think that as a misunderstood or misappreciated or underappreciated asset for an individual is, well, I'm not stating that in quite the words I wanted to use. I just think that is a vastly underappreciated asset for any individual to have is, how well they not just communicate and speak, but how well they relate to other people, both up and down. If you don't have that influence, that social influence, it's just so much more difficult to get things done. Conversely, it's so much easier to get people to give you a chance, to give you a listen. If they don't mind spending 5 minutes with you because you're a decent person to hang around, then it opens the door to so much more opportunity.
It's the beauty of the work. When I was running data before I started down the entrepreneurial path, I tackled a pretty tough problem. And to this day, I probably have a dozen people in my network who are like, thank you. Right. And the pleasure that kind of comes from actually delivering value to someone and helping someone become 1% better who's already very talented is such a gift you can give as a data professional. And the opportunity is so large and the bar is so low in a lot of organizations. It's how do you help people bridge that gap? How do you take that same dataversity mentality, which is like, hey, Mr. Data Leader or Mrs. Data Leader, hey, can you talk to the person to your left in marketing, to the right in operations? Go get a beer, go get a coffee,
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're reminding me of something. I don't know if you remember a gentleman called Graham Simpson, he was like the foremost data modeling author in the world and just a brilliant speaker, one of the funniest professional speakers you could ever come into, but always on point. He had a very successful consulting company, and he eventually transitioned into being a literally internationally best-selling fiction author. But he used to do a class for us on consulting skills, which is not specific to any industry, is just the benefit of his experience as a consultant over 20, 25 years. And the starting point for his starting point with any engagement, any conversation was, how can we help? Or how can I help? And then listen, sit back and listen. It's not going in there with a predetermined solution or pitch it's just listen to what the other person needs, what their problems are. And yeah, there might be a very occasional departure from that, but I really think that's part of the social capital creation exercise is, it tells the other party, I'm listening to you, I'm open. Yeah. And he also, one of his other things was, and this applied both in business and in social relationships, was don't ever offer unsolicited advice.
It's never welcome. Never.
Almost never is. Yeah. Always wait to be asked for your advice or at minimum ask for permission. But I think it's kind of in the same category. It's like, if you come in and try to offer a solution that nobody's asked for, then, it's probably going to fall flat.
Yeah. And it's a trap that we as a profession fall into so
Yeah.
very often. It's sadly too common. Tell me this. We're talking a lot about human traits and a lot of, frankly, philosophical things.
I guess.
Why data? Why dataversity? What was the spark?
Well, like, most people in the data space, I guess I fell into it because there was a door that opened. So the actual history was I came to the US originally from Australia on a 6-week training assignment with a company I worked for that organized professional business conferences, mostly for the banking industry. And I came here and I had the opportunity to work in New York for a few months and then train a group of people who were going to start organizing technology conferences. And that was really fun. We actually did, if you can imagine this, back in 1987, we did a conference on neural networks. And we used to do conferences on AI, which were all about expert systems. So obviously a lot changed in the meantime. But then I worked for a company called Technology Transfer Institute, which was owned by a professor at UCLA called Len Kleinrock, who has a super interesting story in his own right. But then eventually, after about 10 years at TTI, that was a technology training business. After about 10 years at TTI, it was time to branch out on my own. And TTI had a conference that we had started with DAMA International called the Metadata Conference. And I had the opportunity to leave and take that with me. I bought it from Len. And so and we got lucky because around about that was about the .com time. And we did pretty well when we first left that parent. So from there, it was, looking for other things in the data world to do. But yeah, it wasn't, I never sort of sat at home one night thinking, what do I want to do? Oh, I want to run conferences in data management. It was much more about, there's an opportunity here. Come to the US, go to New York, come back to California, work for this company, time to leave. Do this, and at the time I hadn't had a job with a real company like an enterprise for so long. It was hard to imagine going back to that. I knew I had to create something that I could run for myself. And, my wife, thankfully, was moderately supportive. She was concerned about the risks, but she eventually sort of gave me permission to take out a mortgage on our apartment, on our condo, and to finance getting going. So,
Awesome.
yeah.
It's
Incremental
cool.
steps, I guess.
But listening to the universe and following the opportunities as they presented themselves.
Yeah, and it's not like it was a huge success immediately. We had some lean years. Thankfully, the last 10 years or so have at least been good for the data business. We happen to be in a good place at the right time. But even then, you have to keep moving. You have to keep adapting. And I think we've been reasonably good at adapting. But there's
So, as the CEO of the preeminent data conference with the largest community, probably of data leaders on the planet, how do you use data in your day to day to make decisions about your business? Or are you making decisions primarily on gut and situation?
Fair question. We do track a lot of data. I mean, aside from our conferences, we're largely a digital business. So there's a lot of data that we can look at in terms of web stats and, email stats and conversion rates and evaluation scores and all that sort of stuff. I wouldn't say we are obsessed with looking at those stats every day. I mean, the clearest indication of how we're doing is always, our monthly financials. How do things compare to last year? What are the trends? I think we also did a fairly major site redesign about 12 months ago. And so we've probably been a bit more data centric since then. A lot of what that was oriented to do is to create reporting opportunities that didn't exist with the old infrastructure. And we're going through a big redesign at the moment on our training side as well, mostly to try and understand customer behavior and how people are finding us, how they're navigating our site, what questions are they asking us, are they if they start a course, are they finishing it, are they exiting early, are they doing the tests at the end. I mean, we really do track a lot of data that tells us about how people engage with our products and if we're doing a good job. So those are mostly the ways. Yeah. We do quite a lot of online advertising, so we track those. But we're a small business. We're like less than 20 people. There's only so many things there's probably an endless number of things that we could be tracking, but there's only so many things that we have time for or that that would be useful ultimately.
I love the fact that you use data to serve data people so they can help their stakeholders use data better. It's
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things I think I can cite from our direct experience that are relevant to my community, to our community. I mean, the scale of our issues is just so vastly different that I think a lot of it does not translate, but it does enable us at least to connect ideas and concepts that we see our customers struggling with.
Well, talk to me about that. When someone walks into the conference and you've seen thousands of people, and of course you haven't met them all personally, but I'm sure you've met quite a few. What separates a great data leader from a good one and perhaps even a bad one?
Well, yeah, I mean, I hate to give a cliched answer here, but it really does, I think, start with a business first mentality. And, I love to see folks moving into senior data roles from our community, from the data management side of things. If all they bring though is a data perspective, then, I think that's going to be tough. That's going to make their role difficult. I think it really, really helps to have context. I mean, even if maybe you came from the shop floor or the retail a retail outlet or a marketing role into a data role. I think, then going into a senior data role with that background is super helpful. And because you can speak the language, you've got the context, you understand the business, you're probably more inclined to compromise or, to know where the right place to compromise is. Because you're always going to be faced with that issue. So yeah, I think, and thankfully there are a lot of folks who got into data because of necessity from somewhere else, as opposed to, dreaming of being a data architect or a data governance manager while they're in second year at university. So, there are a large number of people with that kind of background. But yeah, I mean, I know it again sounds cliched, but without sufficient business knowledge and context and language, then I just think it's kind of uphill for that kind of individual.
Yeah, it's super consistent with what we've talked about today. And I'm
Yeah.
kind of putting a bow on everything. What do the next 3 to 5 years look like for us as a data community?
Well, I mean, okay. The big picture is I share the world's concerns about AI and, what this is going to do to society and the workforce, all those big things. I do share those concerns. To narrow it down though to the data world, I think that, AI is this humongous opportunity. And so I think, understanding how you can use data to make AI better. And it's not just data. You need other things as well, obviously, and also how AI can make data better. At the conference a couple of weeks ago, it was clear that a lot of people had already started doing this. One of the areas of low hanging fruit is in using AI for metadata remediation or enhancement or completeness. And, and a lot of folks had been pushed to do that because in terms of the context conversation, you need that metadata to create good machine readable context. So, those people have a lot of opportunity, I think, to use their data skills to be really strategically valuable in the AI conversation. And I'm sure there are a lot of things. I mean, data quality is another huge area, but there's probably many more opportunities than I personally would appreciate at the moment. Because, every time I hear practicing data management people talk about how they're using data and AI together, I learn something new every single time. So I do think that there are just this huge number of opportunities out there. How long that will last, I mean, I see people who are successful with that right now. I hope that success continues. How long it will go for is beyond my pay grade to estimate. But yeah, I think within the data space, the next 2 or 3 years, there are lots of reasons for optimism. If you keep moving forward, like anything else, if you sit on your hands and don't keep your skills up to date, then you'll struggle. Your whole organization will struggle in that case.
Well, there's never more an important time to learn about new concepts and techniques. And there's not a better time to meet with your stakeholders and your peer group who are doing new and cool things, perhaps much differently than you would even realize. And probably not, there's probably no better time than to, join the Dataversity community. And I'm excited because I was looking the other day. You guys have another conference coming up, I think, in the fall. Could you tell me a little more about that and how people can get involved?
Yes. So the emphasis of the fall conference, which is in November in Providence, Rhode Island, is the emphasis there is on AI governance. But we always have the data governance and quality component with every event. Whereas the one a couple of weeks ago was that plus enterprise data architecture. The one in November will have a strong emphasis on AI governance. So yeah, that space, we didn't even touch on AI governance, but you can extrapolate from a lot of what we were talking about to include that topic as well. I think that's a topic with, at this point, an infinite time horizon. That's not going to be a topic that comes and goes in the next 2 years. There'll be new types of governance required for AI for a long time to come yet. So yeah, we at that conference, Providence is a smallish town, but it's right in the middle of all the big ones, and it's easy to get to on the train. I went there to look at the venue prior to selecting it, and I thought, well, this is going to be really nice location for a conference instead of having to go to like New York City or Boston. So yeah, I'm very optimistic. We have folks signing up for that already.
Love it. So if you're a data leader looking to meet your peer group, senior, junior, if you want to learn about AI governance, data quality, come join Tony and the Dataversity team in Providence, Rhode Island. And what are the dates specifically? It's November.
It's November 16 through 19. So hopefully the tail end of the fall colors and before whatever blizzards normally come into the Northeast.
A little different than Southern California.
Yeah. It's I'm very fortunate living here.
Tony, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for your contributions to the data community. This has been great.
Thanks, Taylor. Appreciate your friendship and always enjoy our conversations. Thanks a lot. Okay, bye-bye.
That's it for this episode of One Version of the Truth. If you're interested in how leaders turn data into real outcomes, you can follow the show wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Taylor Culver. Thanks again for listening.